Yeah, so
I'll stay on here.
it's really an honor. It's really an honor to be included. I'd like to thank Ben for asking me to do this, and just food for thought offered by Professor Simpson earlier on. The political political phase shifts occurring here in Nepal and the parallels between some of the things that he described that he witnessed in the years following the Gujarat earthquake is some eerie, and I mean truly eerie parallels. I think what Ben wanted me to speak about to begin with is where I stood at the moment of the earthquake, and I'll frame that both in the physical sense and in sort of the research sense. Much like Edward Simpson said, I was very much implicated in this. I was not. I mean, I don't think many people do actually study disaster politics before it happens. I don't think many people anticipate that they'll be implicated by a disaster. My research, however, at the time of my research, at the time of the earthquake, I was in the middle of research about infrastructure. The area that I had been focusing in was also the area I had be in at the time of the earthquake. Northern Rasua, very close to Ben Campbell's heart and some of the roads that he's been studying for years on end. I've been studying the dams that bring those roads and that perpetuate further road building. I had spent a couple of months in the months prior to the earthquake. I had spent a couple of weeks living up at the Rasuagati border of Nepal and Tibet, and so that's kind of where I was at the time of the earthquake. And I'll return to that after I talk more about the current situation of the earthquake and post-earthquake, because my research questions have a lot to do with what Professor Simpson was saying about reconfiguring spatial relationships and the sort of the emotional power of infrastructure. The master's thesis that I wrote a while back, an article coming out soon with the same title, is called "Citizens of a Hydropower Nation." And now my new research questions are about whether the hydropower nation and whose hydropower nation and whose reconstructed hydropower nation and what kind of risk is implied in the rapid reconstruction of a hydropower nation. I really like what Professor Simpson said about power stations with a lazy eye. That kind of obliviousness or an illusion or an obscuring of certain types of risk. That's the kind of narratives that I'm very interested in. And I think those are important questions. At the time of the earthquake proper, I was in Langtang. The Langtang Valley is one of the areas. It's the hardest hit in all of Nepal. It was an incredibly terrifying experience. I had left the village of Langtang just 2 hours before the earthquake. And I don't know to the extent if everyone here has been following what's happened in Nepal, but the village of Langtang was destroyed by a massive avalanche that was triggered by the earthquake. And it's actually unclear how many people actually, the total number of people passed away is still to this day unclear, because they haven't been able to recover many of the bodies. As of this morning, there was actually an article published in Science, the big journal, about landslides and seismic risk and geohazards in Nepal post-earthquake. The avalanche that occurred at Langtang, it was equivalent in scientific terms of force to half of the atomic bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima. And it created a pressure wave that destroyed the landscape and the physical and human landscape for kilometers in either direction. I was only 4 kilometers from the blast. I felt it at the time, but I didn't know what it was. I started running. I didn't know that what I was running from. I thought I was running from a landslide. It was only when I stopped running that I realized the ground was shaking in any direction, in any and every direction underneath me. And so it began. Immediately following the earthquake, I was in the mountains. I was in Langtang Valley for 68 hours before there was a possibility to be evacuated. And I helped a lot. I helped a lot with managed tensions and fear that were occurring in the area between the local community and some of the tourists who were stuck there, and local and other people, other Nepalis who were working in the area who had survived. But the group that I was with, which ended up different people mixed in different groups, there was about 150 of us below the avalanche, and there was another 200 above, and there was about 300 and the most accurate estimate I can go by is about 308 people who died in the village of Langtang. The night before the earthquake, I was actually in a Gewa ceremony, which is a reincarnation ceremony in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, in Langtang village, in a monastery, in a gompa that's now completely destroyed. And these kind of things, I was only in Langtang for mostly personal reasons. I actually had brought, my family was visiting me in Nepal for the first time, and we went there I went there to orient them within Nepal. And then all of a sudden, this happens. And then all of a sudden, you're in it, and you realize that an anthropological lens, or at least what you've been able to understand so far through your training as an anthropologist and through fieldwork, is all of a sudden valuable in a very new way. Once I got out of Langtang and I got back to Kathmandu, I tried to put people in contact people who were missing and try to identify who was still there and who might be alive, who might not be. I briefed lots of different nations about ways to access not just Langtang but other parts of Rasua that I was familiar with, and then eventually all of this came to a head when we started an organization called Rasua Relief, which is a relief organization but not a registered NGO. So my experience with the politics of the earthquake began immediately with this difference in the way that the different expectations that locals and foreigners and Nepalis had. Secondly, with the position of Langtang relative to the rest of Nepal. Immediately after the earthquake, all the helicopters went to Everest, even though Langtang was much harder hit. And even though Langtang is not a sleepy backwater, it's a charismatic tourist area. And then in the news, until the news finally trickled out days later what happened in Langtang, you were just looking at the typical photographs of temples, and you were hearing about the goddamn Google executive who was up in Everest trekking at the time, working on a project. And these sort of things frustrated me at a deep level, having been in the middle of things. So when we got back, the next way I became aware of post-earthquake politics and narration was what I wanted to do as an informal grassroots relief initiative, both providing intelligence or to seasoned organizations that were ready to go, but also doing things like getting on a motorcycle and going to places where other people weren't. These actions were not endorsed by both the government of Nepal, because you're supposed to provide funds through the Prime Minister's Relief Fund, and they weren't endorsed by my own government, which ended up in my unfortunate parting of ways with my Fulbright program, which ended up to be the right decision on all fronts. But basically, this organization that we started existed outside of the formal framework, and that made us more nimble in a lot of different ways, and led to the strange kind of I didn't think about it in any intellectual way at the outset. I was just busy. I was just doing whatever I could. But it's an interesting form of participant observation to try to run a relief organization in the middle of all this chaos. So that's the work that I began. And currently I remain very involved in, but now we're supposedly today with the approval of the Reconstruction Authority, one could claim that we're in a new phase. I don't know if you've all read the news today, but the National Reconstruction Authority was finally passed in the House. To the extent to which things will actually get moving quickly now is unclear, but it is a tipping point, and a positive one, after months of uncertainty. Say that I am anyway congratulating the event. But in the time in between then and now, a wide range of activities. The thing that I'm most involved in at the moment is planning and assisting with the reconstruction of the Langtang Valley. Now, a lot of the government policies that exist in the current moment, it's wonderful to hear about these ideas of togetherness and new forms of optimism in October. I don't think I'm the only bearer of bad news, but the fact of the matter is that it's an incredibly divided state of affairs at the moment. Not just along lines of location, but the principle of there was all these anecdotes at the beginning about Baum, Chetris, and Dalits inhabiting the same spaces post-earthquake. It was a very hopeful narrative. And any and all kinds of optimism of that sort have absolutely collapsed. And there's a very much with government inaction, with ongoing frustration comes an every man for themselves mentality. And I'm not saying that in any essentialized. I'm trying not to say that in an essentialized way, but that it is a common experience, and I found that not just in the areas where I'm working, but working on other projects. It's a very difficult time, and the idea of resilience, this new buzzword, a way to frame, how the Nepali people are weathering through no matter what, it is really it's insulting. Is directly what I've been saying, and that it covers and makes excuses for inaction. Now, what I would really like to talk about as well is with regard to Edward Simpson's remarks, making inaction is also a strategy, and inaction, and in this case, has everything to do with the political gamesmanship, the horse trading, the architecture, massaging of the architecture of the Constitution and the Federalist framework that's going into play, so as to have claim over future resources in a post-Reconstruction state. I think you all know that June 25th, there were $4.4 to $4.5 billion coming from many of the same players and organizations Professor Simpson mentioned, plus China. And importantly, there was actually denial early on of a refusal, rather, of aid coming from other parts of China, for example, Taiwan and others that violated. If Nepal had accepted those, it would have been violating China's One China policy. So certain aid that was offered from certain actors that are distasteful to certain larger powers, that changes the politics of who accepts aid from where. On the Indian side, it was absolutely similar. There was a lot of skirmish support that they were providing, whether or not those machines came in and where they were held up. That's a story that you should ask General Sam Fountain next time you see him on your side of the pond. But there are some massive geopolitics at play, and in the region that I was based in leading up to the earthquake, in the region that I've been most active in reconstruction, you have the Rasuagadi border checkpoint, which is now, which Professor Campbell has written about, which is a new thoroughfare that's opening in the Himalayan range, a new perforation of commerce, so to speak. And during the last year, prior to the earthquake, there was kind of a dress rehearsal for using that corridor as a major form, as a source of, as a site of economic exchange. And then after the earthquake, in both Rasua and Singapore, the two major overland routes to China, the Chinese army came down both roads with an entire I would say brigades of road clearing machinery and mechanisms, up to 25 to 30, at least in Rasua, 25 to 30 different excavators and machines, and systematically cleared territory and opened routes onto Nepali soil. Another important thing is when I went to the humanitarian military operations coordination meetings in the immediate wake of the earthquake, there was a map hung in the central meeting area for all the security forces that had the airspace of Nepal carved up into 3 zones. In the north, you're looking at just said China. In the west, it just said India. In the east, it just said United States. Nepal was confined to Kathmandu. Once again, there are massive power plays at stake in what kind of aid comes into Nepal. And when Professor Simpson lingers on the end talking about, if I were Narendra Modi, I would be paying very close attention. I think that's well said. Now, to the questions of how do things play out from here, there's a lot of ground to try to cover very quickly. I don't know if I'm doing a good job. But there's these multiple, it's important to step back a second. We've been talking about accelerated time and accelerated political time. Am I still coming clearly?
Yeah, and you have about 2 minutes. Oh. Yep, 2.
Okay, 2 minutes.
Okay.
So the velocity of the Constitution and the pace at which it arrived, which you referenced, it's one thing to say that the people of Nepal weren't ready. The people of Nepal weren't ready for a number of reasons. Half of Nepal wasn't ready because of the earthquake. The other half wasn't ready because they had been conditioned to this political inaction for a long period of time. The earthquake absolutely opened an opportunity for the government of Nepal to immediately declare, to fast track the Constitution, and for the sake of just delivering a Constitution, which they were getting international pressure to do, delivered a very retrograde Constitution that basically clawed back a lot of the more progressive mechanisms that were installed in the previous forms, and had been sort of agreed upon in a number of formal settings. Then the comment period for the Constitution, nationally, was a period of 3 to 4 days. And I mean, to the extent that the government was actually able to mobilize different parts of rural Nepal in the wake of the earthquake, where infrastructure and access was already limited, and receive comments, it's a farcical conception. So it's completely, when you're talking about the optics of the delivery of this Constitution and then the quote unquote surprising fallout, it's not surprising in the slightest. To close in the last couple of minutes, one thing that I'd like to talk about is, I think Ben has used this term before, and it's very, I think it's close to his heart. There's this idea that the earthquake was, it's been called the Gorkha earthquake by some, it's been called the Nepal earthquake, it has different names. A few social scientists focused on Nepal, Ben, Catherine March, Deepak Thapa, have been referring to this as the Tamsaling tragedy, Muktalama. And the idea there is that the incidence and the effects of this earthquake fall disproportionately on areas of north-central Nepal that were previously encapsulated in the imagined state of Tamsaling, which would be an ethnic state where the majority of the population was Tamang, which is an ethnic group of northern Nepal. And it's completely true that the death rate and the level of destruction in Tamang communities is much higher than it is in other areas, both because of poor building standards, all sorts of patterns of social and spatial exclusion, and terrain and geography and landslides and avalanches. Now, when the attention was completely on this, the attention was completely on this up until the Constitution was delivered, and now the attention has totally shifted to the southern plains. And there really is this reanimation of cultural difference. There's a and to the extent, I mean, it's incredibly complex, and I think I would love to hear Professor Simpson's further remarks around the Terai and around India's play in the Terai. But one thing I would like to draw, I would mention at the very closing here, is that I'm back to my research on hydropower development. I'm back to my research on transboundary infrastructure on the northern border. I'm back to my research on this idea of a hydropower future, and on this type of discourse that centers on keeping an entire generation from growing up in the dark. The biggest thing that this recent blockade has done is create this massive festering discourse of energy security here in Nepal. So to the extent, I sent some pictures before, 4 slides to Ben before, to the extent maybe to depict a map of all the hydropower projects in Nepal. And the second one depicts a map of all the hydropower projects in Nepal. And then on top of it, all of the epicenters of the aftershocks that have occurred. Now, what that shows you is the fact that hypothetically, the earthquake would cause a rethinking of national planning, particularly one based upon the impoundment of water in seismically active zones. But if the earthquake caused a momentary pause in that narration of the hydropower future, in that narration of risk, now, because of the blockade and the energy crisis, the unofficial blockade, the protests, the energy crisis that is precipitated has caused this resurgent narrative of energy security that makes absolute space for the kind of public-private partnerships that seem to have come into play in Gujarat. So I wanted to kind of bring it to a point where there was a conversation between Professor Simpson's remarks and my own, and I think that's a fascinating thing that we'll see will play out in the coming years. Is Now the Reconstruction Authority has been established, and now there's this emotive and imaginative argument for Nepal rapidly developing its energy resources in a way that might be quote unquote lazy. It's an important moment to look at this type of infrastructure opportunity. So that's a lot. I'm sorry for rambling on a bit, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. So it's a bit different when you're not sitting in front of the room and you can't really get a sense of whether you're running out of things. So, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Austin.
Thank you.